All right, good morning, folks. So, we're going to have to do things this way since apparently Twitch decided to ban me because I showed a pig heart yesterday. If you haven't seen the email, I sent an email out to all the parents and all the students that I have, and yeah, it was a thing. So, this is where we are now. I'll have a new YouTube video up each day until I figure out some other person to person chat that we might be able to. But for right now, let's talk about the lab that you're going to be doing today. Now, you're going to find a lot of this one actually similar to something that we had done much earlier in the year. But this one's going to be focusing more on the designing of an experiment. Before, when we looked at it, we were just trying to look at a connection between the two things. Now we're actually going to be looking at how do you design an experiment based around this information. Now, the first page or two of the lab, you can see it in the upper corner right over here, is background information and stuff like that. Read it, but don't stress over it too much because it's really just making sure that you understand the point that the lab is trying to make. What we're looking at right here is the investigative question. How does exercise affect your heart rate? The nice thing is you're not going to need too much for it. Safety precautions just points out if all of a sudden you start to have some medical issues from this, stop. It's not quite that important. But what you're going to do is you're going to go through and you're basically going to do exercise tests, take your pulse rate, and hopefully be doing that in order to answer an experiment that you've already set up earlier. So if you take a look at the procedure, you were to write a procedure for your lab investigation with the materials that you've chosen to use. List of approved exercises, it goes over some basic ones, jumping jacks, running in place, sit-ups, pull-ups, push-ups, things like that. It's up to you. Anything that gets you up and moving outside of your normal comfort range will work just fine. If you have exercise equipment and you want to do that, sure. If you don't and you just want to sit there and be like, all right, I guess I'll lift something, that works too. Now, you're going to run 2 trials. 2. That means at first, you're going to need a control. If you don't remember what a control is, look back through this lab. It talks about it. It goes over it. If you don't have that, check your notes. If you don't want to go back and read through this and you don't have notes, then go check Schoology. You're going to find it back in the intro unit stuff for what the parts of an experiment are. So, you're going to need your control. Each trial is only going to last a minute. You need to write your hypothesis. In the directions for today, I point out, remember, your hypothesis must be specific and it must be testable. Meaning that whatever you choose as your personal hypothesis needs to be something that you can set up an experiment to, first of all, answer, and second of all, you must be specific in what you expect to happen. So don't just say, if I exercise, then something will occur. Or exercise may or may not increase your heart. That's too wishy-washy. That's not giving us the specifics. You want to say exactly what you're going to do, A, then what is going to happen, which is part B. That's why we tell you use an if-then statement. If I A, then B. Doesn't matter if your hypothesis ends up wrong. That's totally okay. It just needs to be specific and testable. You're going to need to then identify the independent and dependent variables. Once again, check your notes. All the information is something that we have covered. You should have it. And if you don't, Schoology does. Then you're going to collect your data. Now it says collect quantitative data and graph data using the provided data table and graph. So all quantitative means is that you are measuring an amount. Then you're going to have to form your conclusion. Make sure that you either accept, which is misspelled in the lab, or reject your hypothesis and state that. Say, I accept my hypothesis, or I reject my hypothesis. And then the second part, use your data to explain that conclusion. So if your hypothesis was, if I eat cookies, then my blood sugar will go up, and you were to do an experiment on that and then test it and find out that your blood sugar had not gone up yet, you would say that you reject your hypothesis because, according to my data, the blood sugar did not increase the way that I expected it to. Now, on the page after that, it gives you a space to fill out your control, fill out your hypothesis, and then your data table. Now, it's important to note there are a lot of different ways to organize a data table. This data table may be much bigger than you need. Under normal circumstances, we would do this with a class. And you would get your data, you would get some other people's data, we would get the averages, and then we would graph the averages. That's a little bit harder to do when we're all digital. So instead, you guys are going to do yours, and we're just going to work from there. We'll graph it from there. So don't be surprised if this data table is much, much bigger than you need. Now for the graph. Graphing should be pretty straightforward. It's all set up for you, at least the grid work is. You need to put down the X and the Y if you don't remember how to graph. Go back and check your notes for our tails graphing method. If you don't have notes, go check Schoology, because that is also in the intro stuff. So graphing at this point should be second nature to you. And then, you'll get to your conclusions. And when you get to your conclusions over there, you're just going to do that accept or refuse, then explain why based on your data. After that, you have two sets of questions. Now, one of them is the quote-unquote check-out questions. Those are the questions for the end of the lab. But then you're going to notice some weird pre-lab questions. You should do the pre-lab questions that are at the very end of the lab first. And I know that that's a weird setup for it. If you don't get to them until the end, then you get to them at the end. They're still just as good. That will work fine. But just make sure that you answer all of those questions all the way down through number 4 on the lab conclusion, and then all the way down through number 4 on the pre-lab. There's not a whole lot to this one. Some of them literally just say circle, and then it gives you two options. So you just circle whichever one is accurate. So, that should be pretty straightforward. The goal of this lab, and the reason that the New York State Regents wants you to do it, is because they always ask an experimental question. Usually it's one of two different choices. There we go. And that is either A, here's a lab, this is the experiment, here's the procedure, this is what the person's doing. They'll explain all of that. Then they'll ask you, what's wrong with this? What didn't they do that they should have? What mistakes are they making that are violating the way a science lab should be set up? So that's an important bit. The second option is they'll say, Joe wants to research this problem. He needs an answer to it. How would you do it? And then they'll ask you, set up a control. Set up your experimental and your experimental groups and your trials, and set up your procedure. Explain generally how you do it. Now, when you go to write out your procedure, you don't need to do a super detailed step-by-step with every minutia included. Feel free. Don't tell me you need to get a pencil in order to pick it up in order to write an answer. That's way too much. We could just go general. Just generally, what are you going to do in order to accomplish this lab? Alright, so that's going to complete today. When I see you guys, tomorrow, we're going to start moving into the digestive system, because we've now gone over the circulatory system. We'll review it before the test, and otherwise just keep in mind those parts and what each of them do, and you're going to be pretty set for that. So I apologize that this is a short video, but since you guys have a lab to do, I figure that'll eat up the rest of your time. Tomorrow I'll see you. We'll start talking about the digestive system, and then we're going to have all sorts of things to do. The digestive system is by far the big system for this human body section. Everybody, have a great afternoon, and I will see you tomorrow.